The fork was halfway to my mouth when Perline said it. A real wife knows how to keep a household together. She wasn't looking at me when she said it, but everybody at that table knew exactly who it was for. My name is Adeline Corsi, and for 6 years I sat at that woman's table and let comments like that roll off me like rain off a roof. Not that day. Talk had drifted to grandchildren, the way it always did at these reunions, and then somebody, Perline, of course, steered it toward my business. Some of us don't have time to be running around playing businesswoman, she said, eyes on her plate, voice sweet as poison. Maybe that's why this family's still waiting on grandbabies. I felt something in me that had been bending for 6 years. Finally go still. Not loud, not dramatic, just still, the way water gets right before it freezes. That little business of mine, I said, calm, setting my fork down, paid Sherman's tuition last spring, paid for the roof over this very room, and the mortgage shortfall 2 years ago, that came from my account too. Every transfer, every payment ran through my business, with my authorization, because none of you ever asked where the money was actually coming from. Nobody at that table breathed. Perline's face changed first, like she'd swallowed something sideways. Sherman's mouth opened and nothing came out. Sterling, my husband, the man who'd let his whole family believe he was the one holding us all up, just sat there frozen. Like if he didn't move, none of it would be true. I want to pause and ask, what time are y'all watching tonight? Drop it below. I read every single one. It was Cheryl who moved first. She came around that table fast, faster than I expected from a woman her size, and the slap landed before I even saw her hand rise. My cheek caught fire. I didn't cry out. I didn't move. So she hit me again. And still, nobody moved. Not Sherman, sitting 2 feet away. Not the cousins down the table, forks frozen midair. Not Perline, who'd started all of it. I looked around that table once, slow, taking in every face that had decided in that exact moment that I wasn't worth defending. That was the thing that broke in me, not her hand, their stillness. Sterling finally spoke, but not to his sister, to me. You went too far. You need to apologize, or you need to leave. I looked at him for a long moment. 6 years of paying for a family that didn't know my name was on half their bills. And the only thing my husband had to say was that I'd gone too far. I stood up. I gathered my purse off the back of my chair, slow, deliberate, my hand steady in a way that surprised even me. I looked at him one more time, not with anger, not with tears, just with a stillness that told him something had already ended, long before I said a single word. Then I walked out of that house. The car was quiet. No radio, no music. Just the sound of tires on the road and my own breathing, steady in a way I didn't expect it to be. My hands didn't shake on that wheel, not once. I called Cassandra first. She picked up on the second ring like she already knew. They hit you, I said, flat, like I was reading off a receipt, twice. And Sterling told me to apologize or leave. She wanted to come over. I told her no. Not because I didn't need her, because I needed to do the next part alone. At the house, I packed one bag. Folded things I didn't even think about. The way your hands know what to do when your mind's gone somewhere else. No tears. Just movement. Calm laid over chaos like a sheet over furniture in a house nobody's living in anymore. I didn't drive home that night the way I meant to. I drove to the police station instead. The officer behind the desk was young, patient, the kind of patient that comes from doing this every day. He asked me to describe what happened. I did. Then he looked up from his notes. Any prior incidents with this family? He asked. Arguments, threats, anything that might help establish the history here? I sat with that question longer than I expected to. 6 years, I said. My voice didn't break, but something in my chest did, quiet, like a hairline crack in glass. I'd never said it out loud before. Not to Sterling, not to Cassandra, not even to myself in the mirror. 6 years of being talked over, talked down to, treated like the help that happened to share a last name. Saying it out loud to a stranger with a badge made it real in a way 6 years of silence never had. He wrote it down, filed the report, told me I'd get a case number by morning. Filing it wasn't really about Cheryl. Not entirely. It was about me finally putting something in writing that said, "This happened and it mattered, and I am not going to pretend it didn't." Back at my own house, quiet, dark, mine, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and pulled up flights. My finger hovered over the booking button for longer than I want to admit. Not because I was unsure, because some part of me was still waiting for someone to call and make me stay. Nobody called. I booked the one-way ticket. 3 days out. Before heading upstairs, I started gathering financial records I might need while I was away. Tax documents, business records, payroll files, nothing dramatic. Just years of habit telling me to keep important paperwork close whenever life got complicated. I went upstairs to grab my laptop bag and pulled a storage folder from the shelf where I kept old financial files. My business incorporation papers were on top, the date stamped 2 years before my wedding. Underneath them, something I'd almost forgotten existed. The promissory note Perline signed when I paid off the shortfall on her mortgage. My name, right there, as lien holder. Hers, right below it, in handwriting that looked rushed, like she'd wanted to get it over with. I hadn't thought about that paper in 2 years. I turned a few pages, reread part of it, and slid it back into the folder. I don't know why my hand lingered there that night, except that something in me already understood I was going to need to remember exactly what belonged to me, and exactly what agreements had been made. I tucked the folder into my bag, zipped it shut, and turned off the lights. By morning, I was gone. The hotel room was quiet in a way my own house hadn't been in years. No undercurrent, no bracing for the next comment. Just me, a window, and a city that didn't know my name yet. I let myself enjoy that peace for exactly 1 morning before my phone started buzzing. Sterling called first. I watched his name light up the screen and let it ring out. He called again, 20 minutes later. I let that one ring out too. Cassandra filled me in on the rest, piecing it together through Sherman, who was still talking to her even though things were falling apart on his side of the family. Sterling, apparently, told anybody who'd listen that I was being dramatic, that I'd calm down and come around in a day or two, same as I always had. 6 years of folding myself smaller had taught him that lesson well. He just didn't know I'd already learned a different one. By the second day, the calls turned into texts. Then the texts turned sharp, short, clipped, the kind of message somebody sends when frustration's starting to outpace patience. Perline mentioned to Sherman, almost in passing, that the mortgage payment seemed late this month. Sherman didn't think much of it. Why would he? The automatic draft was due that week, same as it had been for months. That account had run smooth for 2 years. Nobody in that house had ever had a reason to look closely at where the money came from. Only that it always arrived. I didn't reach out to fix it. I didn't reach out to explain. For 6 years, I'd been the one making sure nothing in that family ever felt the weight of consequence. I wasn't in a hurry to keep doing that from a hotel room 3 days after being slapped twice at a dinner table, while everyone I loved sat still and watched. By the 3rd day, the cracks widened. A collections call came through to the house. The joint credit card, the one we used for groceries and gas and the small, unremarkable costs of a marriage, had failed its scheduled auto payment. Sterling answered that call himself. I know because Sherman told Cassandra, who told me, that Sterling's voice had gone tight and short with the representative on the phone, like a man trying to sound calm while something cold crawled up the back of his neck. He still didn't understand what was happening. not really. He thought it was a glitch, a bank error, maybe even me being petty, like he'd said, transferring some small amount out of spite that he'd find and laugh about later. That same afternoon, Sherman logged into his student portal and found a notice waiting for him. An overdue tuition balance that had been sitting under a grace period for weeks had finally reached the school's deadline. Registration access had been suspended until payment was received. It wasn't a new problem, just one nobody had paid attention to because historically, the money always appeared before the deadline arrived. 3 separate problems, surfacing one after another, all tied to obligations that had quietly been running through the same source for years. That night, alone in that house that had never once been quiet in 6 years, Sterling finally opened the banking app himself. He stared at a number that didn't make sense to him. Too low, lower than payday, lower than it should have been with both our names supposedly on that account. He didn't understand yet what he was looking at, not the scope of it. Not what it meant that the well that had quietly filled that household for years had simply, finally, stopped. But he knew enough to feel afraid. The text came through while I was sitting by the window, watching a city that still didn't know my name. "Babe, the cards are not working. What did you do?" I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on the table and finished my coffee. 2 hours passed before he called. I let it ring 3 times before I picked up, not because I was nervous, but because I wanted him to sit in that silence a little longer the way I'd been sitting in mine for 6 years. "What did you do?" he said, before I'd even gotten a word out. His voice already had an edge to it, already decided I was the problem he needed to manage. "I didn't do anything," I said. "Adeline, the cards aren't working. Both of them. Mama's calling about the mortgage. The grocery card got declined. Something's wrong with the accounts." "Nothing's wrong with the accounts," I said. "They're working exactly the way they're supposed to." He didn't understand that yet. I could hear it in the pause, the kind of pause a man takes when he's trying to find an explanation that doesn't require him to look in the mirror. "Did you move money? Did you take something out of the joint account out of spite? Because if this is some kind of payback for—" "I didn't touch anything, Sterling." My voice stayed level. I wasn't interested in raising it. "I just stopped being there." "Stopped being where?" "You're not making sense. Every transfer that's kept this family afloat for the last 6 years ran through my account. The mortgage assistance, Sherman's tuition, the groceries you thought magically replenished themselves every week. None of that ran through anything that was ever really yours, Sterling. It ran through me." Silence. Not the kind that comes from not understanding. The kind that comes from understanding too much, too fast. "You're saying—" he started, then stopped. "I'm saying I was the current, and I'm not standing in the room anymore." Still, he didn't ask if I was okay. Not once. Not about the slap. Not about the dinner. Not about whether I'd eaten or slept or cried on that flight. His mind was already 3 steps ahead, doing math on numbers, not on me. "So what? You're punishing me? Punishing all of us because of one night?" "I'm not punishing anybody," I said. "I'm just not there anymore. There's a difference, even if nobody at that table could see it." I heard him exhale, long and slow. The sound of a man finally realizing the ground he thought was solid had never belonged to him at all. "Adeline." His voice cracked on my name. The first real thing I'd heard from him since I left. "Come on, talk to me. We can fix this." I almost smiled. Almost. "You told me to apologize or leave," I said quietly. "I thought you asked me to leave." I left. I hung up before he could say another word. The dial tone sat in my ear for a second after, flat and final, like something closing that was never going to open the same way again. I wasn't in that house when it happened. I didn't need to be. By the time Cassandra called to tell me, she'd already heard it secondhand from Sherman, who'd heard it firsthand from his own mother, shouting into the phone like the walls themselves had betrayed her. Perline opened a certified letter that morning. A shortfall notice from the mortgage servicer, the kind of letter that doesn't knock politely. It just tells you, in cold print, that something you thought was settled is no longer settled at all. She called Sterling before she'd even finished reading it. "Fix this," she told him. The same way she'd told him to fix things his whole life. "Handle it, like you always do." He tried to deflect first. Told her it was probably a processing error, that he'd call the bank, that she shouldn't worry. I know my husband well enough to hear that deflection from 3 states away. The sound of a man buying himself 30 more seconds before the truth catches up to him. It didn't take 30 seconds. Perline pressed. She wanted to know why, if it was just an error, the account showed a balance that hadn't been touched in over a week. And there it was. The question with nowhere left to hide behind. Sterling told her, not gently, not the way you'd choose to deliver something like this if you had any warning you'd have to. He told her the mortgage assistance had never been his money. Not once, not ever. It had run through Adeline's account since the day they set it up. The same as the payoff 2 years ago, the one that had quieted every worry Perline ever had about that house. Cassandra said the line went silent for almost 10 full seconds after that. I can imagine it well enough without being told. Perline, standing in her kitchen, the letter still in her hand, watching the last 6 years rearrange themselves into a shape she didn't recognize. Every dinner where she'd bragged about her son taking care of the family. Every comment about real wives and real providers. All of it sitting on a foundation that was never his to claim. For a moment, Cassandra said Perline didn't sound angry at all. Just stunned. "What do you mean it was Adeline?" she asked. Not defensive, not accusing. Just confused in the way people get when a story they've repeated for years suddenly stops making sense. Sterling told her again. And whatever embarrassment or disbelief she felt lasted only a moment. By the time she spoke again, her voice had hardened into something else entirely. Not grief, not gratitude. Anger, pointed, immediate, aimed in exactly the wrong direction. "She did this on purpose," Perline said, "to humiliate us, to make us look small in front of everybody." Sherman told Cassandra that Sterling didn't say anything to correct her. Not a single word in my defense, even now, even after everything that had already been laid bare in his own mother's kitchen. His silence agreed with the lie. That's the part that stayed with me longest when I heard it. Not the anger, not even the betrayal of the money. It was that even now, even stripped of every illusion he'd built his pride on, Sterling still couldn't bring himself to tell his mother the truth, that I hadn't humiliated anybody. I had simply stopped holding up a house that was never built to hold me. Cassandra called me before Sherman did. She always seemed to be one step ahead of the news, like she had a direct line into that family's unraveling. Sherman got locked out of his student portal mid-semester, a tuition hold tied to an overdue balance that had finally reached the school's deadline, the kind that stops everything cold. Registration, transcripts, the whole machine of a school year grinding to a halt over an unpaid amount nobody told him was unpaid. He called Sterling first, furious, the way a younger brother calls when he assumes somebody dropped a ball they were supposed to be holding. "What happened to my tuition?" he said. "You said it was handled." Sterling, 3 days deep into an unraveling marriage and a mother who wouldn't let him forget it, didn't have the strength left to deflect the way he had with Perline. Cassandra said his voice came out flat, almost relieved, like a man setting down something heavy he'd been carrying too long. "It was never me," he told Sherman. "It was never really me handling anything. It was Adeline, the tuition, the house, all of it. I just let everybody believe it was me." Sherman didn't accept that right away. "What are you talking about?" he shot back. "No, that's not true." Sterling repeated it. "The money came from Adeline." There was a long silence after that. Not the kind that comes from understanding, the kind that comes from refusing to. Sherman started pulling at details instead. "What about last year? The balance when financial aid got delayed?" "Adeline." The semester before that? Adeline. The mortgage? Adeline. Cassandra said every answer sounded exactly the same. By the fourth or fifth question, Sherman stopped arguing. I guess I should have figured it out sooner. He said there had been things over the years. That never quite made sense to him. Times when Sterling complained about money one week and somehow a major bill got handled the next. Times when Adeline quietly took care of something and nobody talked about it afterward. Little things he noticed and then ignored because asking questions would have meant challenging a story the whole family seemed comfortable believing. He said he'd never sat down and done the math. Never gone looking for proof. But once Sterling said it out loud, a lot of things suddenly lined up. But knowing and saying are two different things. And once Sterling admitted it, Sherman's anger found a new direction entirely. You let me believe a lie for years, Sherman said. And this time, his voice did rise. You let me think you were the one taking care of this family. You let me look up to you for something that wasn't even true. That was the part that seemed to land hardest, Cassandra told me. Not the tuition, not even the money. It was the years of misplaced respect, admiration Sherman had given his older brother for a sacrifice that was never his to claim. For the first time since that dinner, somebody in that family turned their anger towards Sterling instead of closing ranks around him. No defending, no excusing, no asking what I might have done to deserve any of it. Just one simple, unanswerable question, hanging between two brothers who'd never had to ask it before. What else have you let me believe? Before Sterling could even try to answer, Sherman told him something else, quieter but heavier. I'm calling Adeline, he said. I want to hear what actually happened that night. From her, not from you, not from Mama. Cassandra said Sterling didn't try to stop him. He didn't have anything left to stop him with. The call came from a number I almost didn't recognize. My cousin Marlene, the one who only ever surfaced at funerals and family emergencies. And apparently, this counted as both. Cheryl's court date is coming up, she said, like she was easing into something. The DA's offering her a plea. Simple battery, probation, a fine. It could all just go away quiet, if you wanted it to. I let her finish. I always let people finish, even when I already know where the sentence is headed. Perline's worried sick, Marlene went on. You know how this looks for the family, Adeline. A court case, Cheryl's name in the system. Family doesn't do this to family. There it was. The same script I'd heard, in one form or another, for 6 years. Family doesn't do this to family. The same words that had kept me quiet about money I'd been quietly pouring into that household since before I had a ring on my finger. The same words that had taught me to swallow comments at dinner tables, to let credit slide onto someone else's name, to make myself smaller so the piece could stay bigger. I sat with that thought for a moment, turning it over the way you'd turn over a stone you'd stepped on 100 times without ever really looking at it. Marlene, I said, calm, let me ask you something. Where was that same loyalty when Cheryl hit me twice in front of everybody and nobody at that table moved? Silence on her end. Not the kind that searches for an answer. The kind that already knows there isn't one worth saying out loud. I'm not trying to start anything, she said, weaker now. I'm just passing along what Perline asked me to say. I know you are, I said, and I understand why. But I'm done being the one who absorbs the cost of everybody else's comfort. I felt something settle in me as I said it. Not rage, not even satisfaction. Just clarity, clean and quiet. The kind that comes when you finally see a pattern for exactly what it's always been. For 6 years, that family had asked me to carry weight without complaint, in exchange for a peace that only ever benefited them. They were asking for the same thing now, dressed up in new language, same old terms. I wasn't interested in paying that price again. Tell Perline I heard her, I said, and tell her I'm not dropping the charges. I hung up before Marlene could try the script a second time. I sat there for a minute, phone warm in my hand, and then I called Romaine. "I'm not dropping the battery charge against Cheryl," I told her the moment she picked up. "And I want you to start the divorce paperwork today, if you can." Romaine didn't ask if I was sure. She'd known me long enough not to need to. "I'll have something drafted by tomorrow," she said. I thanked her, hung up, and sat in the quiet of my own home, a stillness that, for the first time in a long while, felt like it belonged entirely to me. Cassandra and I sat out on her porch with 2 glasses of sweet tea going warm in the evening heat, the first quiet I'd let myself sit in since that dinner. "You never told me the whole story," she said, watching me over the rim of her glass. "How you really built that agency. Everybody just assumes you started it with Sterling somewhere in the picture." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because it was so far from true. "I started it 2 years before I even met him," I said. "One client list. A woman I used to work with at the hospital who needed a reliable aide for her father. Word of mouth after that. I was working double shifts and building that business in whatever hours were left over, long before Sterling Tatum ever crossed my path." Cassandra tilted her head, the question already forming before she asked it. "Then why'd you let him take the credit all these years? Why let his mama believe he was the one holding that family up?" I thought about that longer than I expected to. "I didn't need the credit," I said finally. "I needed peace. It felt like a fair trade at the time. Let him have the image, and in exchange, our house stayed calm. No arguments about ego, no fights about who provided what. For a long time, that trade felt worth it. And now? Now I know peace bought with silence isn't really peace. It's just delay." She didn't push further on that. She didn't have to. Instead, she set her glass down. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Did Sterling actually tell people the business was his?" The question caught me off guard. "No," I said automatically. Then I stopped. A memory surfaced so suddenly it felt like somebody opening a door. About a year earlier, we'd attended a community fundraiser. One of the board members had congratulated Sterling on the growth of the agency. I'd started to correct him, and before I could, Sterling had smiled and said, "We've worked hard to build it." At the time, I'd let it go. Another memory followed. A church banquet. Someone asking how he'd managed to grow the company so quickly. Sterling never claimed ownership outright, but he never corrected anybody either, not once. I sat back in my chair. "What?" Cassandra asked. I shook my head slowly. I always told myself he was just letting people assume things. And maybe that wasn't true. The realization settled heavier than I wanted it to. For years, I'd framed it as passivity. Sterling staying quiet while other people drew the wrong conclusions. But silence repeated often enough becomes its own kind of answer. I told her something else, something I hadn't said out loud to anyone yet. That even back then, some instinct in me had kept my business accounts separate, untouched, meticulously documented, long before the wedding and every year after. Tax records, client contracts, payroll, all of it filed under my name alone, clean enough that no one could ever argue where the money had actually come from. "I don't know why I was so careful," I admitted. Maybe some part of me always knew I'd need the proof someday. Cassandra reached over and squeezed my hand, and for a moment neither of us said anything at all. That's when it hit me. Sitting there in the quiet. Not anger, not even pride in what I'd built. Grief. Real, unhurried grief for the marriage I thought I'd had. Not the one that actually existed, with its quiet imbalance and its borrowed credit, but the one I'd believed in for 6 years. The version where Sterling and I were building something together, side by side, instead of me building everything alone while he stood in front of it, taking a bow. I let myself feel that loss fully, just for a moment, without rushing past it the way I'd rush past so much else. Then my phone buzzed on the table between us. I looked down. A message from the front desk at my office. Sterling was outside, waiting for me. He was standing by his car when I walked out, hands in his pockets, the kind of posture a man takes when he's rehearsed his lines in the mirror one too many times. Adeline. My name came out careful, like he was testing whether I'd let him say it at all. I didn't say anything. I just waited. I know I should have called first, he said. I needed to see you. Things have gotten bad. Mama's beside herself. Sherman's not speaking to me. The house is a mess. I haven't slept right in days. I let him keep talking. I wanted to see how far he'd go, whether he'd find his way to the actual wound or just keep circling the wreckage around it. The bills are piling up, he said. I had to borrow from Desmond just to keep the lights on. I don't even know what's happening with the mortgage on Mama's place anymore. Everything's falling apart, Adeline. Still nothing about the slap. Still nothing about the silence at that table, the way he'd looked at me and told me to apologize or leave, the way not one person in that room had moved. I gave him room anyway. One more breath of space, in case the real apology was sitting somewhere underneath all that noise, waiting its turn. It never came. What do you need from me? He asked instead. What's it going to take to fix this? To get things back to normal? There it was. Not what did I break. Not how could he make it right with me. Just, what would restore the version of his life that worked for him? Normal, I repeated quietly. Yeah. Us. The house. All of it. He took a step closer, and I could see the calculation behind his eyes. A man doing math on a problem instead of sitting with a person he'd hurt. I'll talk to Cheryl. I'll handle Mama. We can figure out the money stuff together, like we used to. Like we used to, I said, meaning like I used to while you stood in front of it. He flinched at that, but it didn't stop him. Adeline, come on. We've been through worse than this. I almost asked him to name one thing worse than being hit twice, while my husband told me I'd gone too far. I didn't. I already knew there was nothing he could say that would make that math come out even. What struck me most, standing there in that parking lot, wasn't anger. It was confirmation, quiet, almost peaceful, of something I'd already suspected since the moment I picked up his first call. He wasn't here for me. He was here for the version of his life I'd been quietly holding up. I've already talked to a lawyer, I said. The word landed in the air between us before I even said it outright, but I said it anyway, because he needed to hear it plainly, the way I'd needed plain truth from him for 6 years and never gotten it. Divorce, Sterling? I've started the paperwork. His face changed. Not anger, not yet. Just the look of a man watching the word become real for the first time, right there in a parking lot, with nothing rehearsed left to say. She was sitting in my waiting room when I came out of my last appointment, hands folded in her lap like she'd been raised to wait properly even when she had no business being there at all. Perline, I kept my voice even. Sherman, give you this address? I needed to see you, she said, standing. Mother, too. She stopped herself before finishing that sentence, like even she could hear how little right she had to it anymore. I led her into my office instead of letting that conversation happen in front of my staff. I came because of the marriage, she said, once the door was closed. Because of family. Whatever's happened between you and Sterling, that's between you two. But this is bigger than that now. This is about all of us. Is it about the marriage? I asked. Or is it about the letter from the mortgage servicer? She didn't answer right away. Her composure, usually so polished, so practiced, slipped just slightly at the corners. For a moment, she looked older than I remembered. Not angry, not defensive, just tired. I don't know how I'm going to cover that house without help, she finally said, quieter than I'd ever heard her. I don't have it, Adeline. I never did. The house was never just help, Perline. She looked at me, confused, like I'd shifted the conversation somewhere she hadn't prepared for. 2 years ago, I paid off the balance on that mortgage, I said. You signed a promissory note when I did it. My name as lionholder. Yours, agreeing to the terms. Her face went through several things at once. Confusion, then something closer to memory surfacing slow, like she was reaching back through fog for a piece of paper she'd convinced herself never really mattered. That was just paperwork, she said. Formality. I didn't think. You didn't think I'd ever need it, I said, because you never thought there'd come a day when I'd stop being quiet. She sat down without being asked to, like her legs had decided for her. For one beat, sitting there watching her absorb the weight of something she'd let herself forget existed, I felt something close to sympathy. She was an old woman, realizing the ground under her was never as solid as she'd believed. And there's no real comfort in watching that happen to anybody, family or not. Then I remembered the table, the slap, the stillness on every face around that room, including hers, while her daughter's hand came down on my cheek twice and nobody moved to stop it. The sympathy passed quickly after that. Before I filed anything, I said, Romaine reviewed the note and all the supporting records. Everything was drafted properly when it was signed. The terms are exactly what they were the day you agreed to them. Pearline looked down at her hands. I'm not going to seize anything, I told her. I'm not going to forgive the note either. I'll honor it exactly as written. Payments continue on the terms you agreed to. Nothing more, nothing less. She blinked at me, still not fully understanding what I was telling her. That this had always been enforceable. That the paper she'd signed without much thought 2 years ago had never stopped being real, just because nobody had ever needed to use it. She just never expected I would. You're really going to do this, she said. Not a question. A realization settling into place. I already have, I said. She left my office without another word, and I sat there afterward in the quiet, thinking about how long that family had mistaken my patience for permission. Romaine called to tell me the letter had gone out by certified mail, the kind that requires a signature, the kind that can't be ignored or claimed lost in a stack of unopened mail. I didn't ask for details about what happened when it landed. I didn't need to. I knew Sterling well enough to picture it without being there. Sherman filled in the rest later, the way he'd taken to doing since the day he stopped covering for his brother. Sterling was the one who signed for it. He read it alone in the kitchen before anyone else in that house even knew it had arrived. Romaine's letterhead at the top, his name and Adeline's side by side, for what both of them understood would be one of the last times. The letter didn't waste words. It formally confirmed the divorce filing already in motion. It confirmed that all future communication regarding the legal process would go through counsel. And it confirmed that the promissory note on Pearline's house would now be enforced exactly as written. Formal payments. On schedule. No informal grace extended going forward. Sherman said Sterling sat with that letter for a long time before he moved. I think that's the moment it finally became real to him. Not because of the note, not because of the money, because for the first time since I'd walked away, he was holding something that couldn't be argued with. No conversation to redirect. No version of events to reinterpret. No family gathering where everyone could agree to pretend something else was true. Just paper. Official, dated, signed paper. Sherman said Sterling read the letter 3 times. The first time as a husband, hoping there was still room to fix something. The second time as a son, realizing his mother's problems were no longer going to be quietly absorbed by somebody else. And the third time as a man forced to face what he'd spent 6 years avoiding. The truth had never actually been hidden. The business records existed. The bank records existed. The mortgage note existed. The tuition payments existed. All the evidence had been there the entire time. The only thing missing had been his willingness to acknowledge it. Sherman said Sterling sat at that table, working through something heavier than anger. The particular weight of realizing that most of what was falling apart around him hadn't been caused by Adeline leaving. It had been caused by years of letting her stand underneath responsibilities he was happy to receive credit for. He had a choice in that kitchen. Tell his mother and sister now, on his own terms, or let them find out the way everything else in that house seemed to get discovered lately. By accident. Too late. Already in motion. He chose neither. He just sat there, the letter open in front of him, trying to find words for something he'd never had to explain before. He didn't get the chance to choose his moment. Pearline came down for coffee before he'd moved from that chair. She saw the envelope first, Romaine's name printed clean across the top, and reached for it before Sterling could think to stop her. By the time he looked up, it was already in her hands. He didn't call first this time. He just showed up, standing on the small porch of the place I'd started renting. No rehearsed posture. No car to lean against like a man staging a scene. Just him, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him look. Pearline saw the letter, he said, before I'd even said hello. She knows everything now. Cheryl knows. Everybody knows. I let him in. Not because I owed him that, but because some part of me still wanted to see what was left of him without an audience to perform for. He sat down across from me, and for a long moment he didn't say anything at all. When he finally spoke, his voice had none of the edge it carried in that parking lot weeks ago. I'm losing everything, he said. My mother won't look at me the same. Sherman barely speaks to me. The house, the family, all of it. It's falling apart, and I don't know how to stop any of it. I noticed what he didn't ask this time. He didn't ask what it would take to fix things. He didn't offer to handle Cheryl, or manage his mother, or restore some version of normal. There was nothing transactional left in him. Just loss, plain and unguarded. Something in my chest gave way, just slightly, hearing that. Not because his words moved me, because they confirmed something I'd been holding at arm's length since the night I walked out. That whatever we'd been to each other was actually over now. Not just paused, not just wounded. Over. Sterling, I said, quiet. Everything you just told me is about you. What you're losing. What's falling apart around you. You haven't said one word about that night. About what happened to me. He looked up at that, like the observation cut somewhere he hadn't braced for. I know I failed you, he said. I know that. You didn't fail me, I said. You chose. There's a difference. Failing is an accident. You stood there and watched your sister hit me twice, and you chose your mother's comfort over my safety. That's not failure, Sterling. That's a decision. He didn't argue. Maybe for the first time since this all started, he didn't try to talk his way around something true. I let myself sit with my own honesty for a moment too. I'm not grieving you, I said softly. Not the man sitting in front of me. I'm grieving the one I thought I married. The one I believed was building something with me, instead of standing in front of what I built, taking the credit. It was the closest I'd come to vulnerable since that dinner. Brief, controlled, but real. I let it exist for exactly as long as it needed to. Then I closed that door again, gently, the way you close something you don't plan on reopening. There's something that has to happen before any of this finishes, I told him. Cheryl's court date is next week. I'm not softening anything for that courtroom. Not for her, not for your mother, not for you. He nodded once, like a man who'd finally run out of arguments worth making. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, fluorescent and quiet, in a way that made every sound feel louder than it should. I sat near the back, Romaine beside me, watching Cheryl stand at the defense table in clothes too formal for someone trying to disappear into them. The DA read the charge plainly. Simple battery. Cheryl's lawyer entered the plea. Guilty, in exchange for probation and a fine. The whole exchange, clinical and quick. The way these things often are when nobody's fighting the outcome anymore. The judge looked over the paperwork, then up at Cheryl. You understand the terms of this agreement? Yes, Your Honor. You understand that by entering this plea, you are accepting responsibility for the charge before the court? Cheryl hesitated only a second. Yes, Your Honor. That was it. No speech, no excuses, no attempt to explain away what happened at that table. Just two words that carried more weight than anything she'd said since the night she raised her hand. I watched Perline's face the entire time. She sat rigid in the row across from me, eyes fixed on her daughter as the judge read terms into a record that would exist long after this courtroom emptied out. I don't think Perline had ever imagined a day where her daughter's name would sit inside a legal file, permanent, searchable, real. It took less than 15 minutes. Cheryl didn't look at me once. Outside, the Atlanta heat hit different than it had inside that air-conditioned room. Romaine stepped aside to take a call, giving me a moment alone that Perline used to close the distance between us. "Are you satisfied now?" she asked. Her voice didn't have its usual polish. It just sounded tired. I considered the question longer than she probably expected. "I was never trying to destroy this family, Perline," I said. "I want you to understand that, even if you never believe it. I wasn't trying to ruin Cheryl or humiliate you or take anything that wasn't already mine to take." "Then what was all this for?" "I was trying to stop disappearing," I said. "For 6 years, I poured myself into that house, that mortgage, that tuition, your son's pride. And not one of you ever had to know my name was attached to any of it. I wasn't angry about the money. I was angry about being invisible inside my own sacrifice." She didn't have anything to say to that. I watched her search for something, an excuse, a deflection, even just more anger to reach for, and come up empty. For the first time since I'd known her, Perline Tatum had nothing left to say. I left her standing there on the courthouse steps and walked toward my car, the weight of the morning settling into something that almost felt like peace. My phone buzzed before I reached the parking lot. I glanced down, expecting Cassandra or maybe Romaine confirming the next steps on the divorce filing. It was Sterling. "Can we talk? Just one real conversation. No asking for anything." I stood there for a moment, key still in my hand, reading those words twice before I put the phone away. We met at a small coffee shop neither of us had any history with. Neutral ground, no family within miles of either of us. He was already seated when I arrived, hands wrapped around a cup he wasn't drinking from. "Thank you for coming," he said. I sat down across from him and waited. I'd learned over these past weeks that waiting usually told me more than asking ever did. "I've been thinking about that night," he said. "Not the cards, not the money. The actual night. The dinner." I didn't say anything. I let him keep going. "I saw Cheryl hit you," he said, voice steady in a way I hadn't heard from him before. "I saw it happen twice, and some part of me knew in that exact moment I should have crossed that room and stood between you and her, but I didn't. I told you to apologize instead." He paused, like the next part cost him something to say out loud. "I think I've known my whole life that I wasn't really the man my family believed I was. The provider. The one holding everything up. And some twisted part of me would rather protect that lie than protect you. Because losing that image felt like losing the only thing I thought made me worth something to them. I didn't soften it for him. I didn't tell him it was understandable or human or any of the small mercies people offer to ease a hard truth. But I didn't say anything cruel either. I just let his words sit in the space between us, exactly as heavy as they actually were. "That's the first true thing you've said to me since this all started," I told him. He looked down at his cup, then back up at me. And for a moment he looked less like the man who'd stood frozen at that table and more like someone I'd actually recognized once, a long time ago. "Is it too late?" he asked, quiet, almost helpless. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch, not to punish him, just because the truth needed a moment to arrive on its own time. He understood before I said a word. I watched it land in his face, not shock, just confirmation of something he'd probably already known walking in. "The divorce is moving toward an uncontested settlement," I said finally. "Romaine's finishing the paperwork. The arrangement with your mother's house stands exactly as the note specified when I signed it. Nothing more. Nothing forgiven, nothing taken either." He nodded slowly, and for the first time since any of this began, he didn't have an argument left to offer. No bargaining, no reaching for some angle that might change the outcome. Just quiet acceptance of something that had been true for longer than either of us had been willing to say out loud. We sat there a moment, longer, two people finally being honest with each other, a few years, and one slap too late for it to mean what it might have meant before. Then I stood, thanked him for finally saying it, and walked out into the afternoon alone. The courthouse steps looked different in the morning light than they had the day of Cheryl's hearing. Same stone, same heat already rising off the pavement, but everything about that day had carried weight, and this one didn't. The divorce was final. Romaine stood beside me for the last time in any official capacity, going over the closing details in that calm, unhurried voice of hers. The business had never been seriously contested in the end. The premarital incorporation, the years of separate records, the clean documentation of labor that was always entirely mine. Romaine had told me months earlier that the records were exactly what a court would want to see if ownership were ever questioned. Sterling's side hadn't pushed hard for any of it. I think, by the end, even he understood there was nothing there that had ever belonged to him. "It's done," Romaine said, closing her folder, cleanly. "No appeals expected." I thanked her and stood there a moment longer than I needed to, letting the finality of it settle somewhere quiet inside me. Sherman called later that afternoon, and for the first time since this all started, his voice didn't carry urgency or fallout, just gratitude, plain and uncomplicated. "I never thanked you," he said, "for the tuition, for years of it actually, without me ever knowing your name was on any of it. I just wanted to say it properly, now that I can." I told him he didn't owe me that, but I let myself receive it anyway. It was the first thank you in this whole story that hadn't come wrapped around a request for something else. He mentioned, almost in passing, something Sterling had told Desmond at work the week before, that he'd finally said the whole truth out loud, not performing for anybody, not protecting the image he'd spent years building on borrowed credit. Just facts, plain as Sherman could relay them. He'd lost his wife, his standing with his own family, and the only version of himself he'd ever let people see, all in the same handful of months. No excuses this time. No deflection. Just a man finally describing his own collapse honestly, to someone who had no reason to need that honesty from him. Then Sherman said something else. "I should have paid closer attention years ago," he admitted. "There were things that never made sense. I just didn't ask questions." I didn't answer right away. "Most people don't," I said finally. "No," he said quietly. "Most people should." When we hung up, I didn't feel triumph hearing any of it. I didn't feel much of anything sharp at all. Just a quiet, settled kind of peace. Driving back to my office that afternoon, windows down, the Atlanta skyline catching the late sun, I let myself smile. Not the wide, performative kind. Something smaller. Something real. The smile of a woman who'd spent 6 years disappearing into other people's comfort and had finally, fully, stepped back into her own name. My phone rang just as I pulled into the lot. A new number. A potential client, judging by the area code. "Good afternoon," I answered. "This is Adeline Corsi." "Hi, yes, I was referred to your agency. Is this the owner I'm speaking with?" I sat there for a second, key still in the ignition, the engine ticking down to quiet. "Yes," I said. "And yes, I built this myself."